Gentleman from Ohio is recognized to explain his amendment, and obviously we would welcome any additional comments from members and certainly from the chair and ranking member. Mr. Joyce is recognized.
Thank you. Some would say we've debated this ad nauseum, and I can appreciate that. What I try to do is listen to the concerns of my brothers and sisters here. I wish, and I beg your indulgence for keeping you beyond the time we should have been out of here. And I can tell you as a fellow appropriator that if every committee in this building worked as hard as we do, we'd get a lot more done. But I certainly appreciate your staying by. We've tried to engage that since we passed, it was brought to our attention that when we passed in CJS, the criminal or the part that withholding funds for the criminal aspect was for medical, then this would be in line with the medical marijuana purposes that were being served in those states that have it. And I'd urge you to consider and vote for it because I believe it's appropriate for those states that have legitimately brought state medical marijuana to the forefront.
Chairman Graves is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the gentleman. I know he's been working on this issue for a long time. He's heard the concerns of the committee, and look, this is a complicated issue, but there's clearly a gray area, and there's room for improvement. This is a good first step. I think he has narrowed it to a point of which he heard the consensus of this committee in a bipartisan sense, and but with that, certainly it's up to the committee and your decision whether or not we include this in our final bill, but I thank the gentleman for his good work and hard work on this.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to congratulate the gentleman for his persistence, creativity. It's been an interesting process in this last amendment. Just want you to know, as a 10-year veteran of the Cook County Board and a staffer for 10 years at the Chicago City Council, I'm home.
Thank you.
All that being said, I support the amendment.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
All right, so gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole.
Thank you, and thank my friends. It's actually been a good discussion, been helpful to some of us that are not as involved in this issue. I would ask the gentleman, I know Oklahoma is listed here. We've not made the decision yet as a state to adopt medical marijuana. That's actually on the ballot in Oklahoma on June the 26th. And so I don't want to anything that would presuppose how that election will go. Literally, the voters of the state have not made a decision on this yet. So I asked if the gentleman would, if he could just withdraw us from his amendment, and if that's appropriate. Just a little second, because I don't want to be voting on something that presumes my state is for something that I don't know yet how they're going to vote.
They just wouldn't apply to
If I'm not mistaken, at the moment,
You'll yield to Mr.
Certainly
Jones, please.
yield to my friend.
that CBD oil, which is part of this, that it treats
That,
people.
okay, that would apply?
Yes, that's
Okay,
correct.
well, then I'll withdraw my concern. That was not clear to me. I thank my friend.
Thank you.
Further discussion, Ms. McCollum and then Mr. Mona.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I want to compliment Mr. Joyce. I want to compliment all of us. This is very rare in Congress where we see an opportunity to come together, move something forward, and address everybody's concerns and considerations. And I want to thank Mr. Joyce for working with me and the members on our side of the aisle. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Mona, that you didn't say anything about going home, did you? That was Mr. Simpson.
That was Mr. Simpson.
Okay. Mr. Mona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess my concern with this amendment is it's not clear to me what definition we're using of medical marijuana. Are we using a federal definition? If so, what is the definition of medical marijuana in the federal law? And if not, is each state determining their own definition of medical marijuana? It seems to me very unclear.
You're making just general comments. You're not addressing them to you. Could,
well,
course,
if the sponsor of the amendment, and I appreciate the work he's done on this, would answer that question, it would help me because I cannot support something where it's referring to medical marijuana if we don't have a consistent definition in federal law of what medical marijuana is.
Would you want the sponsor to yield to you?
Yes, please.
Okay.
The federal treatment of marijuana is always consistent. That hasn't changed. What we've allowed to do is the states to exercise their rights and made it make their judgment as to what they deem to be medical marijuana. As you can see in the the case that was just brought up by my dear friend Mr. Cole, that CBD oil, which helps children with seizures, is considered part of what Oklahoma already determines to be medicinal marijuana. Yet further aspects or use of that will be voted on by his people, just like I'm not sure what happened in your state, but in Ohio, the legislature did it. Other states have passed it as an amendment to, or has somehow passed it through state referendums. So each state is defining what the, and again, it goes back to Mr. Molinar, the idea that we need to do the research as to what it's good for and what it's bad for. Obviously, we've heard that it's been effective in some states where it's been found to be legal and from ladies and gentlemen who served in the service for PTSD. The full effects of it are yet to be found, and that's what we're trying to get accomplished here.
Further discussion, former chairman, Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Chairman, there is a reason why we have a division between authorization and appropriations. And this is one of the best examples that I can think of where we need to let the authorizers, with their expertise and their experience and their time, to sort through the questions that we have about this matter. This is a complicated matter, obviously. It's also significant, but this would be a very significant change in the law, which I think should be done by the authorizers, not us. Number two, I don't know how a bank would be able to tell whether or not a sack of money that comes in, whether or not that's from medical marijuana or recreational. I don't know how they would be able to decide that. And if they can't, they're subjecting themselves to possible heavy liability. And I don't think it's fair for us to foist onto the banks to determine and examine whether or not the sack of cash is legal or not. So I would hope we would let the authorizers handle this matter, and we would have a lot more confidence in the answers to the questions that people like my friend has just raised. I yield back.
Further discussion. I have some comments. I admire the fact that Mr. Joyce has gone back to the drawing board. He's drawn on some of the knowledge of some of the people in the room here who are more professionally involved in these issues. I am extremely uncomfortable about, quite honestly, moving forward on this. It is complicated, and there is a gray area. Obviously, if there's a desire to have a vote, I personally think this needs far more attention. I'm very uncomfortable about moving ahead on this. And from listening to the members, I'm concerned about it, and I'm sort of inclined, quite honestly, to ask you to withdraw your amendment and take it on for another day. But I want to be respectful, obviously, of the work and thought that's gone into us. I think it's extremely complicated, and I somewhat want to associate myself with Mr. Rogers. We are moving right into the area of authorization, the very type of authorization that many people criticize us on other parts of our bills. So I'd ask that you consider withdrawing your amendment.
I've had the opportunity to, been working on this especially since Ohio has gotten involved into it. The answers to the questions that you raise are legitimate, legitimate answers that we're going to find out. I agree. If Congress was doing their job, the authorized committees were doing their job, maybe we do something, but that just hasn't occurred. And so what we're trying to do is, we're not changing the law. We're just asking for those who are trying to do what they find to be the wishes of their constituents, since we are a body of representatives, allowing that to take place in what we would call the laboratories of our states both for medical marijuana and for democracy. They've chosen this route. 46 states have voted it in. We're just asking for them to have the opportunity if they see fit. Banks and credit unions don't have to do this, but those who want to engage in it will provide the buffer between us and the illegal remedies or the illegal dealers out there, because they will have to verify that the funds coming in are coming from medicinal facilities. They'll at least have the opportunity to engage if they want to, and if they don't want to, fine. But that's what I'm asking for. That's why I think we'd like to move this one step forward, and I would ask for a recorded vote. Or no, not a recorded vote, excuse me, a voice vote, because I know you want to get going, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Capser.
Yes, I just wanted to state something because I'm not a doctor and I'm not a medical professional, but obviously Ohio's like the #1 state in deaths per capita related to opioid abuse and fentanyl, black tar, heroin, all of it. And
Will the lady yield?
I'll yield to the gentleman in a second. Every law enforcement officer I talk to, I ask about the pathway toward use. And to a person, as they have examined people who have died, there is an entry-level experience, and it begins with an M, and it's not methamphetamine. And so I had the head of NISHTA come in and see me because I said, I want you to give me the best information NIH has on what happens to the brain, to the patient, and intergenerationally to their children. And I said, so show me for long-term use of marijuana, and I'm not disagreeing with medical use of marijuana. I voted for that in the past. But I said, I want to know what happens to the brain and where it happens. I want to know what happens with black tar heroin. I want to know what happens with cocaine. Every single addictive substance, I want to know what happens. And they began to show me maps of the brain and some of what they don't know, which was shocking to me. And they could not answer my questions definitively on long-term use of marijuana and increased amounts of use. And then the pathway to something else, and to look at and then they showed me what it takes to try to get someone off of an addictive substance like that. And the numbers we have approximately 8 readmissions per patient that is heavily addicted, right? I'm not saying to marijuana, but other drugs that follow on, and how difficult it is to try to unwind that in the brain and why. And they showed me MRIs of the brain. What was shocking to me was, after all these years, why can't medical science tell us exactly what happens to the brain and to the children of users? They can't answer that. So it creates uncertainty in members who are not medical professionals, who are trying to do the right thing for their constituents and for their country. But I just wanted to put that set of facts on the table because it made me very uncomfortable.
Further discussion on the Joyce Amendment, Mr. Ryan?
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to add, I guess we could probably have this discussion in Ohio and leave everybody else out of it at this point, but I just want to make the point that one of the concerns that I think a lot of us have is that we do have marijuana getting laced with all of these other drugs in them. And where 30 years ago, someone experimenting with marijuana could now face laced with all of this horrible stuff that we're seeing in Ohio. I believe that the process here of moving towards both medical and overall legalization will provide safer, more controlled substances, just like in alcohol. There are limited levels, it's controlled. As the gentleman from Nevada suggested, it's eventually taxed. So I just want to support this amendment, my friend from Ohio, and say that this is complicated, but I support him because this is the kind of thing that needs to get done. These things are helping save lives, improving the quality of life, and I wanted to add my support.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Ms. Herrera, Butler is recognized.
I thank the chairman and the sponsor for working diligently on this. And like I said before, I think there are good people on both sides of this issue. This is not a cut and dried issue. And I associate myself with the remarks of the former chairman and the current chairman, which, hey, surprise, surprise, guys, come on. I really strongly believe that we're making an amazing, it seems like a small thing, and it was tailored and it was crafted tightly. And I know that the staff and the teams working on this did everything they could. But the reality is we are stepping into a place that we have no business stepping into. We have not done the hearings. We have not heard the testimony. We do not have the science. We do not have the background, good or bad. We're appropriators. And in Labor H, we've had some of these conversations, and I welcome more. Let's have more. Let's do it. Let's take it on. But at 7:45, and we got this new amendment 10 minutes ago, and we're debating a major change to federal policy here and now. I'm just saying it is, because when you open this door, the way this amendment was originally crafted was including recreational use, and that was not an accident. And I'm not saying that against the gentleman who offered it. I'm saying against the people in the industry who is behind it. The reason it was crafted that way is to allow banking, federal banking for recreational use. And if we don't believe that, then shoot, we fell off the turnip truck yesterday. And I love that the chairman, or that the sponsor recrafted it, because I don't think that was his heart or his intent. He's trying, and the lady, I don't think they're trying to do that. But the reality is, if we open this piece and we don't have all the background behind it, man, the litigation and the gray area that we're stepping into as appropriators, not as authorizers, is too much for this hour, this time and now. And again, I just plead that we hit pause.
Gentleman from Texas, Judge Carter.
Mr. Chairman, I very much admire the man.
Please give Judge Carter your attention. Thank you.
This is going to be very brief. I very much admire his tenacity, but I want to go on record to say I'm voting no.
For further discussion, let me say I asked the sponsor. I would like you to withdraw your amendment. I'm asking you again to withdraw your amendment.
Well, I appreciate my former chairman and my chairman putting their foot down, I guess, and trying to make sure that I don't have enough votes to carry this forward. I appreciate the fact that you don't want to vote, but just for giggles, maybe we might try a voice vote if the chairman would allow that and be satisfied with the results of a voice vote.
I'm asking you to withdraw your amendment.
And I'll withdraw the amendment.